Chris. That's very impressive. I think anyway, can we ask you to take us through our new
Waiata.
Waiata?
Aye. Ka pai. So I'll take lead as Pierre did, and I'll go line by line and just repeat after me. I'm deaf in one ear at the moment, so you could probably say most anything.
They need to know these two gentlemen on either side.
It alternates.
Aye, ka pai.
That's just encouraging up here, isn't it?
Just repeat after me. Te ara I whanatuaira.
Te ara I whanatuaira.
Pūrākau e tū mai nei.
Pūrākau e tū mai nei.
E piki ki runga rā.
E piki ki runga rā.
Kia mārama ahau.
Kia marama ahau.
Kei raro ko te matau.
Kei raro ko te mātou.
Te whakatikanga ake ki runga rā.
Te whakatikanga ake ki runga rā.
Ka titi whā te rehutai.
Ka titi whā te rehutai.
Te ara I whanatuaira.
Te ara I whanatuaira.
Ko te kura ki ahau.
Ko te kura ki ahau.
Hei tohu noa ake.
Hei tohu noa ake.
Ki te kura.
I te kura.
I te rehutai.
I te rehutai.
Te whakawhiti o te rā.
Te whakawhiti o te rā.
Te whakaai o whenua.
Te whakaai o whenua.
Poki muri mai au ki te iwi.
Ki muri mai au ki te iwi.
Te ara I whanatuaira.
Te ara I whanatuaira.
Oh, we're definitely getting better. Why? And together we'll say the English side. On the path most travelled, behold the grove of trees. I ascend so that I may see clearly. Below is Te Matou, and as I rise to go forth, a light shines through the sea spray upon the path of roots. I retain this room, symbol of legacy beyond the struggles, causing the sun to shine, to spread peace over the land. I now return to the people upon the trodden path. Kia ora.
Oh, that was beautiful. Thank you, Anyway, that was really great. Okay. Do we have any apologies today? We have none. So that's excellent. And notices, Sarah was going to report on her economic findings post-COVID, after in lunch. But I think that we'll take the half hour and have lunch, and then we'll sit down here, and then Sarah can go through it with all councillors, what her findings and the methodology of discovering it. So Sarah can join us for lunch. That'll be good. Also, just on outside bodies, we're going to have a short report from Heniwai re Tourism, and where we're at post-COVID would be really good. And Will, where are you, Will? You're going to report, what? I slipped my mind. What was it? What are you going to report
Future farming.
Future farming.
No, the
Weather
kind of
update.
drought, the current
drought.
drought status.
The current
affixing
drought status.
and response.
I just hope there's more rain going to
Sorry,
come.
I was just kidding.
Okay. Any conflict of interest?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got one with the Wairoa District Council wastewater consent.
Yeah.
As
Because you live in Wairoa or Whakapapa?
Tata are one of the submitters in supporting that process, so I just won't want to present any problems here.
Okay.
And not sure if there is any conflict, but I'll refrain from participating in the right tree, right place until I have a better understanding of our role.
Oh, okay.
And mine's wastewater, because I'm a submitter.
You're someone you actually live there. I think you can still participate in the conversation. You just registered that you have a conflict because you live there. So we're fine with that. Rick?
It has a conflict no more so than anybody else who lives
that's right.
in Wairoa. So just noting that.
Yeah. We don't have to move the conflicts, do we? No,
No,
we just noted
just
them. Okay, confirmation of our last minutes.
I'll move if you like to.
Second.
If there's any points in the minutes before Rick moves, otherwise we have a mover. Do we have a seconder to move the minutes?
Second.
Heniwai. All those in favour of moving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye. Are there any matters arising from these minutes that are not on the agenda, or that you cannot be raised in minor items?
I don't see matters arising on the agenda, Chair.
No, I've introduced it for the third time. Okay, there are none, that's good. So, follow-ups from the previous council meeting.
So, Chair, there are 5 listed, and there's nothing to add to the comments that are already provided, so we'll just take questions if there are any from councillors.
Any questions?
I'm happy to move the follow-ups report be received, Chair.
Thank you. Seconded, Hennyway seconded. All those in favour?
Aye.
Follow-ups are accepted. Significant activities, item 5.
Chair, we'll also suggest that these are taken as read, and happy to answer any questions. The one thing I did just want to bring to council's attention is the very high volume of work that we're still undertaking under the Regional Business Partner Program, particularly with COVID affected small to medium enterprises in the region. The volume of work massively exceeds that undertaken in a normal year, and there's a tail of support still being provided to many businesses, and I think what that suggests is twofold. One is that there are significant impacts to small to medium enterprises in some particular sectors within the region resulting from COVID disruption, particularly around the disruption to inbound tourism into New Zealand. But I think the other thing this underscores, given what we're seeing around the unemployment statistics in the region, is that many of these businesses are holding on, and probably in no small part to the various forms of support provided to the government, whether it be wage subsidies or the scheme here, which is providing business support and business advice. So I think we're seeing the real benefits of these interventions and the support that we are providing, and we just hope as many as possible of these businesses continue to survive and thrive in the recovery period. Other than that, Chair, will take questions from councillors on the report.
Okay, I'll come to councillors in a minute. I just have a couple. One, item 35. 12 properties have failed their possum monitor. Are you telling us that there are 12 properties that can't be bothered?
There are 12 properties, as I understand, that the residual trap counts are not delivering on the numbers. I don't know whether Mr Maxwell's got a further comment to make.
That's correct, Chair. So the properties that are monitored under the PCA program have failed their residual trap catch percentage, and there's more work now going on to there's a more detailed report on our biosecurity activities coming to the environment and integrated catchment next week, which goes into a lot more detail.
Okay.
This particular issue, because we're discovering a large number of properties are failing.
Okay, thanks Ian. So, and when you bring that report, I'll be really interested in what our redress is.
Sure.
So when you do that. So the other one is item 86, septic tanks. Right through the region, it's got to be an issue, doesn't it? Septic tanks, old septic tanks.
Well, certainly, Chair, the reason that we introduced septic tank replacement to the Sustainable Homes program in the last long-term plan was to provide an avenue for ratepayers to spread the cost of replacement of their septic tanks across a 10-year period and have that recovered on the rates bill at a low interest rate. We've had some uptake of that, but I don't think nearly as much as we would like, and I think there is an opportunity in this long-term plan to consider whether or not there's further funding extended for the Sustainable Homes program, which at the whole of program level is at a high level of subscription. In relation to the specific incident, though, Liz might be able to provide a bit more information.
Yeah, so this arose because of the odour issue complaints that we received last year from the Hawawana ponds, and so really what's happening this summer is that our science team will be undertaking more sampling to try and look at what contaminants are actually in there, whether or not they can be traced back to the septic tanks. The Hastings District Council has been working with us. I've actually raised a bridge to try and help increase the flow, and yeah, there's just further work ongoing.
Thank you, Liz. Right, any other questions the operational issues? We'll start with Will and we'll come round to you, Neil, and then you had one, Joe. Will?
Sure, just number 112, extraction of gravel from Upper Tuki. Has there been any recent contact between staff and those key ratepayers, and what's the kind of feeling so far or feedback around the proposal?
Chris.
Yeah, so we had a public meeting probably 6 weeks or so ago with a general invitation to ratepayers. We had our best turnout almost ever, I understand, in terms of the ratepayers who attended that session. The general feeling was one of support to pursue the option, and of course the scheme raising a loan is a conversation topic for the LTP, and we have another meeting scheduled with the Category A ratepayers in November, which is the large ratepayers who pay, you know, $15, $20, up to $30,000 in rates on that scheme, and that's because they have large land holdings directly on the river, and so we still have that meeting to go. So a lot of the preparatory work is being done this year in terms of surveys and drone surveys, and then also a number of workshops with industry, looking at the best mechanisms to set up around our contracting strategy, and we'll progressively provide more information to council as it's available.
Thank you, Chris. Jeff?
Yes, so actually, just 2 points in regards to the Hamoana lagoons. I was involved in that when the community actually got together and actually talked about the smell that actually came out of those lagoons during those hot days. And Dr. Andy Hicks actually was part of that, and the smell is actually created by a bacteria that actually lives in those particular types of lagoons anyway, and it's actually nothing to do with E. coli, which was just really interesting. But at the same time, we also offered that we would actually do this work. So it's really good that actually our council staff is actually supporting that community there. The other one I have is health and safety issue. It seems Article 30, points 36, you're going to use a helicopter utilising an underslung strop man. You've got to have somebody hanging on the bottom of a helicopter and actually putting bait into nests.
So, Chair, I can respond to that.
I've got a nomination.
That's what they do in those. It's not our staff that do that.
Contract.
Council.
Oh, that's the councillors.
But a next.
It's a very heavily regulated activity.
Okay.
There are very extensive health and safety procedures and protocols. We have responsibilities as well because they're our contractors. It's a very regulated activity, and it's as safe as it can be.
Thank you.
Thank you. Neil?
Beats walking there, I'll tell you that.
Neil?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to go to the structure of the activities report, James, and just in terms of the whole of region, was there some activity in terms of Three Waters? Given its prominence, I wonder whether we ought to report on a regular basis around that. Is that possible?
So the Three Waters engagement in here, as you may well have seen, is particularly in the central catchments, and it's referenced the engagement with Napier City Council and Hastings District Council around the full program of compliance work on those assets. There was also specific engagement noted with Central Hawke's Bay District Council around their assets in the southern catchments, and the focus obviously in the northern catchment has been the consenting around the wastewater, but
Sure.
I'm not sure that there's any compliance work in the northern catchment to speak of, although I know there has been investigations and activity up there, but
Sure.
nothing of significance to
I was
report.
probably more meaning the more strategic and sort of policy and planning approach, whether there was it was worth reporting at that level, the regional level, as to direction of travel for Three Waters. But given that you've commented on the regulatory elements, I note that Wairoa, or the northern catchment, there's limited commentary on the regulatory environment there. And I just wondered whether we could tease out under the central catchment the Hastings district and Napier City as distinct reporting as to activities around that.
So Liz might wish to provide some comment. I do note that
I find it difficult to hear the question, sorry.
So look, the annual compliance report is coming to the Corporate and Strategic Committee meeting in December, and there's extensive commentary in that around the Three Waters engagement with the TAs across the region. Liz, a particular question in relation to that HDC and NCC engagement on the year's program of Three Waters compliance. I can't find the number here, but I did read it, so I know there is commentary on that.
83?
That's the one? Mm-hmm. Oh, that's in relation to the stormwater, yep.
Stormwater, wastewater.
Yeah.
83.
Yes, and that's just reporting back on the quarterly meetings that staff have, and really what we're looking at doing, there seems to be more interest now in having a region-wide stormwater education program. We've worked with Napier City Council for a number of years on that, and other councils, particularly Central Hawke's Bay and Hastings, are now interested in being able to have a region-wide stormwater education project.
You satisfied with that? 'Cause
Well,
I think
it was more the structure of the report and whether we could be specifically focused on the engagement with each council on their issues. For example, we've got the long-term plans. I'd be interested to know the extent to which planning is taking place and our, if you like, engagement or line of sight on their plans. So we've got some specific reporting going on against those. I appreciate that there's the annual report, but this report is on our ongoing activity. We've got quite detailed catchment management reporting, but we don't seem to have the same level of if you like, reporting back to us what's going on an ongoing basis.
Thank you,
So,
Neil.
well, in terms of the asset management planning process as part of the long-term plan, probably the area in which we're getting the greatest visibility of those is through the Three Waters review. And you might recall that the Three Waters review undertaken by Morrison Lowe identified that in the existing long-term plans, the 4 territorial authorities were undershooting their forecast expenditure by about 100%, so that they need to invest around 600 million over this coming LTP period rather than the 300 million that had been forecast. So what we are aware of is that the asset management plans of each council are being significantly upgraded to meet future expectations. That's creating obviously some affordability challenges. That's all very live in the middle of this Three Waters review at the moment. And so we've got some visibility into those processes, but what we would anticipate happening is that once those councils have started to land their draft long-term plans, that there will be an exchange of those asset management plans, and in due course council will make a decision about whether we submit on their long-term plan processes an opinion about whether or not we consider their asset management plans to be adequate.
Thanks, James. Rick and then Craig, and can we make those last two because we're spending a lot of time on this.
Well, it's a bit unfair on Craig, I feel. You took the first 2 questions and I'll get a chance to read ours. Supplementary to yours, a quick question is on this review of the possum control area, PCA. I just want to know from Ian, when we have the report, will it include a joined-up report with Osprey as well as the Regional Council, given our problem we had before where it seemed to fall in between 2 chairs? We said we're told it would do, but I just want your further reassurance it will do.
Yes, you're talking about about, sorry, item 34?
Yes.
Okay, yep. The answer is yes, the review will include our relationship with Osprey and any changes, improvements, adjustments that need to be made to that relationship.
And I'll report as part of that as well. Okay, my question relates to 102. I see this is a very interesting subject here. Could we have a bit more detail on what's going on here about the CHB wastewater upgrades? It's been a matter of some controversy in the past. I appreciate that we've got a change of management and leadership and we're making good progress, but I'd just like to have a bit more detail on how that's panning out. It's been a bit quiet for me.
Okay, that's noted. You want some, I think.
We'll do that as a follow-up?
Yep.
Or you can just simply send us an email around to councillors afterwards. Be happy with that.
Thank you, Rick. Craig?
109 and 113 about the farm management, environment management plans. Just the numbers look pretty significant there. To date, we've had some 800 farm environment management plans across the Tukituki catchment area. That sounds really good progress, and for everyone involved from the farm. Now, I realise there's more hoops to go through yet, but can you comment on that? It seems to be going a lot better, just that comment there, than where we were a few months ago with some of the upheavals and angst about these.
Thanks, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we're very happy with that. I mean, we estimate that there's about 1,100 properties in the catchment. Some don't require farm plans because they're either a lifestyle block or low intensity land use. So to only have 7 identified as not having submitted and us having to consider our enforcement processes, we're very pleased with that output as well, really pleased.
You're very smart. Thank you, Liz. If we don't have any more...
Oh, can I just...
yes, Michelle?
sorry, it's a supplementary again on the same 34 and 35. Sorry, Mr. Chair. Around the possum control, with the 12 properties that were monitored, what were the RTCs, and also when was the last time they were monitored?
That's the key.
In between. And the other question is, just a comment. Talking to some of the Māori landowners on Whenua Rahui covenants, it's been, and these are in Osprey areas, 9 years since they were monitored. So I know in the report that it said that there was lack of monitoring and blah, 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 but when they're not monitored, you don't know how bad the issue is if you have no measure, and then you turn around and say, well, we've got a 1080 you. Again, finding those gaps.
I don't know
It's
who would
one
answer
thing to
that.
monitor now,
Would you-
but when was the last time it was monitored? Because I'm
Ian?
finding properties.
I can't answer in terms of the details around the numbers, Michelle. I'll put that information for you in an email if you want. In terms of areas under Osprey control, again, I can't comment on their monitoring regime in any detail, but again, we can get that information. In our own DCA monitoring program of the 700,000 hectares that we do about 10% every year. The key point being that in the PCA area there is a landowner obligation for control.
No, I understand that one.
Our job is to simply monitor to ensure that control is effective, not to do
The pest control. Yeah.
But Ian, it would be good if you could find out for Michelle and the rest of us the Osprey situation. So thanks for doing that. Anyone last one?
This is referring to 105. So what role does the Hawke's Bay Regional Council play in AMP shows across the region?
So we have a presence typically at Wairoa, Central Hawke's Bay and the Hawke's Bay AMP show annually. And we usually have a presence there in which we highlight the range of services that we provide to rural landowners. So there'll be biosecurity teams members, biodiversity, there's also catchment management staff as well. So, and we tend to have a sponsorship arrangement. They tend to be fairly effective vehicles for us to engage with the rural community because we obviously get high foot traffic and it's a good opportunity to showcase council services.
So it's a promotional event that we attend that doesn't require a lot of resource? Because
Look, it typically involves some staff time, but it's staff that are usually dedicated to engaging with rural landowners, and so it's effectively part of their BAU.
It's pretty good. RP, you got something else?
It's going to move.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Uppy, quickly.
Could I have a request to staff around, sorry, thank you, Councillor Hornsby. Could I have a request around our intentions on how we're going to utilise those events over the next 4 years, given the conduced work period we've got and the range of information we need to share with our communities? If that is quite an effective forum, I'd love to see how we're going to be using that effectively over the next 4 years.
Thank you. We'll come back to you on that. Rick, you move.
I'm happy to move that the Hawke's Bay Regional Council receives and notes the significant HBRC activities through November 2020 staff report.
Sheriff will second.
Yep.
Thank you. Do you wish to say anything?
No, thank you.
Sheriff? All those in favour?
Aye.
Thank you very much. We'll put 30 minutes, I think, for all that section in the future. Because we need 30 minutes. Because it's all really good questions.
Work we're doing.
It's important. Okay, so we'll move to decision items. Call for minor items not on the agenda. We have two, didn't we? We had, Craig?
Yes.
Minor item.
Yes.
What was your subject?
Logs of wood.
Logs of wood?
Log of wood.
Log of wood.
Log of wood. Oh,
An S or without an S?
yeah.
Red, really?
I was going to give a quick update on Wairoa Hawke, and Neil, you had something. No?
No.
I put your name down.
Take it off.
Take it off.
Mine is just on regards to Three Waters and the Māori values.
Maori values and Three Waters.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So decision item number 7, report from the RPC. And who's going to do that for us? Belinda? No?
So Kerry can probably speak to it if need be.
Didn't you chair the meeting?
I did. I can talk to it if you like. Okay, so well, it was a very good meeting. We talked about the Mohaka plan change and how we were going to get tangata whenua right at the front end of the Mohaka plan change. I'm very pleased about that, and I think we should this should be an example to us as we go forward and move on to Wairoa. We talked about the regional coastal environmental plan. And more importantly, the Kotahi item was introduced, and we all know how all-embracing that is and how important that is going to be for us to go forward. We had an update on central government's freshwater resource management reform and the resource management policy projects. There was one other thing. One of the most important recommendation that we did agree to support the co-design process with tangata whenua for Mohaka. That was the most important thing that we did on the day, I thought. Any questions?
How do you feel the meeting went? Did you think it was a good meeting, well coordinated, well led?
I thought it was brilliantly chaired meeting. I actually think that the RPC has really turned a corner from my perspective. And it's a very constructive group of people there that are determined to go forward and fix our environment. I really feel that it's a very constructive group of people.
Could you talk to us about item 4, Kotahi? I think there's quite an innovative piece of work program there. I think you've just skipped over this a bit.
I'm going to pass to our CEO on how innovative it is. It speaks for itself. You're trying to catch me out, Rick, aren't you?
No,
I'm not yet a possum in the headlights.
No. The point is that the report here does not fully explain the significance and the value of what was decided there. It is quite an innovative leap. It is a big leap. And I just think it should be on the record for public to see what we are doing here.
So, look, for the public's benefit, the Regional Resource Management Plan is the instrument by which we set rules around the management of natural resources for the region. The most significant focus of that work presently is fresh water across the region, and we did, until recently, have a progressive implementation program that saw Council looking at each major catchment of the region, catchment by catchment, over a period of about a decade. Where the rules would be reviewed for water quality and quantity management and associated land use. Now that program of work is no longer going to be fast enough to meet the new government's requirements that we have our limits set for all freshwater bodies across the region notified by the end of 2024. And so we're now proposing a revised approach, which instead of seeing us modify the regional resource management plan catchment by catchment over time, that we would do one process for the whole region. That would be a mountains to sea approach, would pick up the regional coastal environment plan improvements that we need to make as well. So in a holistic way, we're considering all the effects of land use on our freshwater bodies and on the coastal environment. And we also propose to pick up improvements to the air quality chapter of the regional plan too. The significance for this, for the community, is that there will be an intensive period of engagement over the next few years on all aspects of managing the environment of Te Matua Maui, and the Council's science and planning resources will need to be mobilised and behind that effort, and it will be an enormous body of work for this Council and for the Regional Planning Committee to work through the many and varied issues we have for improving the environment that we have here in Hawke's Bay.
Thank you, James. Did that satisfy you, Councillor Barker?
Yes, thank you.
Well, can I have a move and a second, and then we
I'll
can
move.
speak?
Yep.
Yeah, you'll
I'll
move.
second it.
Thank you very much.
Can I
anyway.
speak?
And second, and
Yep.
who's to speak?
Yeah, I just want to add that I think the tone during the RPC when we talked about kotahi and having to move at a very fast speed in terms of plan changes, and where we're going was apprehension, actually, because we're going to have to do a heck of a lot in a short space of time. So I just want to add the complexity and challenges that will come up over the next few years to be able to achieve what we want to through kotahi.
Thank you, Hanaway. Rick, do you want to speak?
I'd like to second the motion and support that. And I just think what we're saying here in Kotahi, people should not underestimate it. It's like going to be on the Starship Enterprise. We've called on Spock to go warp speed 5. This is going to be super fast. But we shouldn't worry about the pace of change, because it's the direction and the outcome that we want the most here. The government has pushed the fast forward button on cleaning up our waters, and instead of doing it piece by piece, bit by bit, we're going to take the lot, as the Chief Executive said, from the mountains to the sea in one go. And we're just going to all have to live with truncated, shortened, tightened up processes, but in the best interests of improving our waterways. This is a big job, not just for this council and councillors, but also for the public. But it's all heading in the right directions for best interests. So I think it's a stunning step, and I congratulate the staff and those who made the design, because I think it's outstanding.
Thank you, Rick. Mark?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Chairman, and I'm grateful to Councillor Barker for putting some light on this. I guess the point I wish to share, not just with my colleagues and those on the Regional Planning Committee, but the Hawke's Bay wider community, is to think carefully about its ambition. If we are entering this kotahi plan process or objective with an ambition of perfection, we will fail. If our ambition is substantial improvement in the direction Councillor Barker has just shared, we can succeed. But if we fight to the death for perfection on everything, we're not going to go anywhere. So I really ask the regional community to think about locking in some wins and moving on to the next stage, rather than this is the last battle ever on every issue that's in front of you. The other advantage of this is that you can retain the catchment up model as you do for with the Mohaka plan change, and bolt them together under a kotahi model. But we just simply cannot repeat the tank experience. We just don't have time to go nowhere. The issues are too compelling. So it will be all issues, and I think that's going to be a ratepayer saved, it's going to be more effective, and it's going to be more efficient. It is not only ki uta ki tai, but it is from the heavens to the earth. So it's going to be air quality and all those other issues that have been coming across our table. The final thing I just wish to say, Mr Chairman, is that I'm very heartened again about the working relationship with the Regional Planning Committee and the improving track of that in terms of working better together, because we are going to have to.
Yeah, that's right. Any other speakers? Api?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So happy to speak in support of the receiving the paper. Was at the meeting, so but would like to take the opportunity to express some concern. The volume of work. We sit here entering this space saying we need to accept that we're going to have to take certain compromises going forward in order to achieve what we want to achieve within the timeframes before us. And so I understand that as we set out where we're going, but I would remind this council that we're only asking approximately 1/3 of our catchment to accept those compromises. Wairoa hasn't gone through any of this work, nor has Pōhangaro and a couple of our other areas, Mohaka. So ultimately, it's only those areas that are going to have to take big compromises on some huge issues in a short, truncated period. So what we'll be looking for from an iwi perspective is how Hawke's Bay Regional Council will be looking to, I guess, show the demonstration of the seriousness around these outcomes through what they put into the LTP over the next coming years. Because if we're asked to pull up our socks and work 3 times as harder as any other catchment going into the development of our plans, we'd love to see that mirrored in the LTP, so that we know that we can walk into the next 4 years with some resourcing to achieve what we hope we will achieve together. Got it.
Thank you, Api. Any other speakers? Otherwise, Heniwa, do you have a right of reply? Do you wish to? No other speakers then? We move to accept the recommendation to the Regional Planning Committee? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. So we have item 8, which is the delegation of the Wairoa Wastewater Discharge hearing to that panel. So
This is a reasonably formal, straightforward matter. I'm happy to move the resolution. For Chair, I don't know that there's any explanation, does it?
it doesn't. Does anybody need explanation, or we move straight to it? So we have quite an illustrious panel, small but illustrious. Martin, you can, need to stand back on this, I guess.
That's why I moved it.
Do you wish to second it, anyway? Rick, would you wish to speak?
Oh, I just want to say that I support this. I also congratulate Councillor Williams on getting himself on the panel. I went and did the course, and over the period of 4 years, I've never been put onto a panel. So I think
Frame the certificate.
that Councillor Williams has shown fast speed here. I'm very impressed with it. I jest. Anyway, I think it's going to be an outstanding panel. It needs to be done. Let's get on with it.
Anyway.
Absolutely. I'm in support of Councillor Williams becoming the chair for this panel, and he's working really hard to achieve the chair certification amongst all the other things that he's doing at the moment, so fully support.
Any other speakers?
Just one question, Mr. Chair. Was there an alternate? Has there been an alternate panel member in position in case anybody is unable to fulfil their duties?
Don't think that's just a straight two, is it?
Yeah, we dropped it.
Sorry?
No, it's just the 3 on this panel.
Yep.
That's right. I think Malcolm Green was a replacement from a previous appointee who.
Dr. Jim Cook, yes, he was unavailable.
That's right. So
Yes, was the answer.
we have been able to make a replacement, and if again one of these 3 were unable to perform their duties, then we would need to make another.
Sorry, I didn't pick up your question earlier before we rushed to it. My apologies, Mike. I just it's been moved and seconded. Anyone else wish to speak?
Can I just clarify something? I know that this isn't actually a paper that's anything more than ensuring the panel that has been appointed has all of the legislative tools in its kit that may come up for what could be quite a challenging hearing. That's all of that.
That's correct.
Just a formal process. Okay, all those in favour then?
Aye.
Aye. Against, and you abstained.
I don't think it's necessary to do so. I think
I
he is
think we're
quite entitled
delegating powers
to
to the
delegate,
committee.
be part of the delegation of powers
It doesn't need to.
I'll say
to a
aye.
committee of himself. So.
Okay. Then that is passed then. Thank you very much. 9, schedule of meetings. We've all got that in front of us.
So, Chair, I'd just like to acknowledge that Leanne's done a great job of juggling things around to try and clear school holidays, and you'll see that there's clearance in April and October school holiday periods, but also a good stretch through July. So, COVID permitting, next year we will have hopefully a more orderly year in terms of the balance between council business and time for people to take vacations.
Given we've already discussed this before on a couple of occasions, I'm happy to move them.
Thank you. Councillor Segner? Yep. Do you wish to speak, Rick? You don't have to have the school holidays off, you're just supporting Henny Y and me here, aren't you?
I'm very happy with that. I think it's a good program.
It is. Jeff, do you wish to speak? Anyone else wish to speak?
Just to simply make the point, the appreciation and gratitude I express is not just for the councillors, but this matters for the staff that are involved in getting ready for those meetings and attending them. So I think that's where the value lies.
Yeah. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Against? It's carried. Thank you. Fixing the common seal.
I traditionally do this
Councillor
for you, so I'm
Barker.
happy to move it again.
Give it a stand.
We have a mover to fix the common seal. Do we have a seconder? Up here you can't, I don't think. Craig? Do you wish to speak, councillor? Craig, do you wish to speak?
I do not.
Anyone else wish to speak on this matter? All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? It's carried. Right, now we've got a really good one. Item 7, Clive River Dredging. Chris, they've only got 20 minutes down here, Chris, but fortunately we've rushed through and we've got a little bit more time now.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. So, just to introduce Martina. Martina's our Manager of Regional Assets, and also David Kedeker, he's our Manager of our Regional Projects. So David's team is in charge of executing our significant projects, and Martina, our Asset Management, which in this case monitors and then triggers and scopes this piece of work for execution by David's team. So before I hand over, just wanted to point out that this particular paper hasn't been through a committee, it's come straight to council.
Well, the work went through a workshop.
It did go through a workshop, and the reason for that is we need to provide some assurance to our dredging company and of which way the project is proceeding, and so we do need a decision or some direction from council. So that's the reason it hasn't gone through a full committee process. So I'll just hand over to Martina, who will just go through the key points of the paper, and then happy to have a discussion and answer any questions.
Kia ora everyone, thank you. So we started working on this project, and the original scope was to dredge the river and discharge the silt to the coast. We presented to council in last year in November, probably November 2019, 4 options, and 2 of those options were land discharge, and 2 of them was additional option for the coast discharge, with a very high level cost estimation for all those options. Since then, and the council appetite was to look a little bit further into the land discharge and do a little bit more costing and what that may means. Do we have the land or other risk associated with the land discharge? So all this time, since last year until now, we've been constantly working on the methodology, risk identifications, defining the cost, and now we're under the position where we actually last week proposed all this information to the council, and it is a significant increase in cost for dredging operation. And so the land discharge got 2 options, and that is the discharge to open pond and manage the water and the silt
as a stormwater ponding, or there's going to be discharge to the tube or a sock, which is probably easier to manage, but it's a significant increase in cost, and also the waste of the sock is probably questionable. So we are now in the position where we have to kind of also, another issue is that if we are going to go through for the land discharge, there is unlikely that we're going to achieve the resource consent with the dredging in February 2021, because we are still not in a position that we have the lease signed with the landowners, and we are still not in a position where we can eliminate the quite significant risk for the affected parties. So we probably be more likely to be dredging in 2 years' time rather than in February 2021. And therefore, there was recommendation, or there's recommendation that we may go back to the original scope and with more environmental monitoring in place for dredging, to try to achieve dredging in 2021. So I think I summarized pretty much everything what I need. If you have any questions.
Questions? Sorry, Neil.
Thank you, and congratulations on your appointment, Martina. Well done.
Thank you.
See you there. Look, just a question in terms of if things were deferred, if we did nothing in February next, what would be the consequences for the river and the stakeholders if we deferred for a year?
So if we defer to a year, there is, as I put it there is a Hawkesbury Regional Council reputation. It's just that we have Hawkesbury Regional Council reputation. We have discussed with the recreational users about the dredging, and we already deferred for a year. There is no flooding issue, or there is no significant other issue. It's just that the river is, when it's a low tide, the river is low for some kayaking or other activities.
So the recreational use would be curtailed or
That's right.
limited for that year?
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Just supplement to that, how low can it proceed? If you didn't do it for a year, can the rowing continue, and can the waka ama continue?
So, so we have had to chat to some of the users, and it's very tidal. So on a high tide, it can be utilised, but in a lowish type tide, when you're rowing, your oars are physically going into the sediment, and so it does restrict the use to the higher parts of the tide. It has also interrupted a cultural business in terms of the utilisation of a waka from that site. And we also have a discussion every Waitangi Day around the use of the waka between the reserve and the Waitangi reserve. So that's also an issue that comes up. So it's predominantly cultural, some cultural use and recreational use will be curtailed for that year.
Okay, thank you. Mike?
So just looking at the paper in here regards to what is meant by the traditional ocean-based disposal? So
we have done the Clive River Dredging twice before, in 1998, 2008, 2008, and we were planning to do it 2018 or 2019. So traditional basically was that we traditionally, or it always was planned that the dredge, the silt will go to coast. I know they have been looking into a land discharge in 2008, but there was no land available for that activities, and therefore they just went through to the original scope, and that was the coast discharge.
So this is the traditional foreshore disposal?
Traditional kind of what was done in the past, yeah.
So my other question is just in regards to if this activity was to take place in 2021, it'll be 2031 before this issue would come up again,
That's right.
meaning 30 years that mana whenua have raised their concerns in regards to this practice. 30 years. I think mana whenuas have been more than patient and willing to work with regional council over this time, but 30 years? I've got to say, I've got to ask council, where's the partnership? It was 30 years, where's the partnership? We're still going to have the same conversation in 30 years' time.
Just on that, was there a strong objection in the past from mana whenua on this, was there?
So that certainly is our understanding, and in the recommendations of this particular report, we also have a recommendation in there about council agreeing to consider formally changing the scope of the Clive River Dredging to essentially put away additional funds every year, so that for the next campaign we have the financial aspects of this covered. So I guess what we're trying to signal here is let's correct any fault of the past by also agreeing to put funding aside, so we don't have to consider the financial aspects during the next campaign.
My final question, Mr. Chairman. So given the fact that the recommendation is that we basically stick with the status quo, which will mean 30 years, so what mitigation would have taken place over those 30 years to change this activity?
I think I can speak to that in so much as identifying suitable land that's appropriate in terms of location and size to accommodate land-based discharge, which I think was just identified in the last 2 years. Just to talk to that point, we have gone through a process to secure land. Our preference would have been to purchase the land, but on this occasion that doesn't look likely, and that's why we're sat here today looking for direction.
So you've identified potential mitigation, but actually haven't done any mitigation.
Confirmed.
Would that be a fair enough comment? Yep.
Anyway.
Yeah. Can I just clarify a few things? First, the financials. So on page 5 of this item, it's got the reserve funds available, 964,000. So that's being collected over a 10-year period?
Yep.
Yeah, correct?
So approximately 100,000 is put into reserve every year, so we have approximately $1 million.
And who do we collect that from?
So that's collected from the ratepayers of the scheme. So of the Heritonga scheme, which is I think 70% target rate and 30% general rate.
There's also some contribution from HDC in the past, and I think that's still being considered.
Right. So if we looked at option 4, which is do nothing, how could we use that reserve fund for the future?
So I guess the response to that is if it was to do nothing for 1 year or 2 years, then we would obviously keep that money in reserve for when the work is done. If the question is, should we be dredging the Clive River at all, and we don't dredge the Clive River, what would happen with that funding? The answer to that is we would probably use it elsewhere in the scheme. It has been collected primarily from a targeted rate scheme process, so there would be some restrictions about how that money can be utilised for other things.
One last question in that line is, does the Kohupātaki marae and upstream to the Karamu, are they included in the scheme, and therefore a rate's collected from upstream to what point?
So they are in the Heritonga scheme area. I would have to take advice on to whether they pay rates and the extent of the rates that are paid.
So it's the whole Heritonga area?
So it's the whole Heritonga scheme, which is
So
a substantial area.
Okay.
They'll be in. Any other questions?
Thanks very much. There seems to be kind of a parallel thing going on here, because we go to the paper and your various options. You have status quo 1, I think, and then 4, which is the do nothing. But you also note in the paper that this was originally scheduled in 1819. And so what was deemed necessary back then, I assume, is deemed even more necessary now. And one thing that's not really mentioned in the paper, you touch on it, is reputational risk, is actually there is a huge, well, there's a quite reasonable expectation by the public that we have fresh, clean water and access to water for whatever purpose. And thus you're trying to remedy a situation. So I would say the general public fully expect the river to be able to be used for the purposes they deem fit, and they cannot work out why it cannot be used, and they look to us, and they see a failure of us of taking action. So there's that part of it. Then there's a point which does worry me and troubles me about discussions. Maybe insinuations were made in the past and nothing's happened, insofar as concerns that some of my colleagues here have raised. And I am always uncomfortable with that because I keep a faith that everyone keeps the faith. So I will be promoting or in favour of the current, the status quo, A, because it was urgent or was planned, B, it's in the existing long-term plan. But the caveat is actually a commitment, within a solid commitment and a path of progress and action, insofar as we're not, the council in 10 years is not having this discussion. It worries me that the council 10 years ago may have had this discussion. So it's incumbent on all of us to get on and do what is expected of us to do, but with respect to our entire community and the implications of commitments we've made. It worries me deeply that others' implications may have been made of positive action or engagement or consultation, whatever you like, and actually hasn't been followed through. Because if that is the case, then that is not a good look and will impede so many of the other good work, much of the other good work we're trying to do as a council.
So was that your question?
There was.
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Chair, can I just make a comment? I think one of the things which was not understood in 2018-19 and when we had the initial conversation with Council about a land disposal discharge option, and was possibly not understood in 2010 as well, and that is the magnitude of the cost and the technical complexity around dewatering on a land-based discharge approach. And the work that we have done faithfully for Council following discussion, including with the Māori Standing Committee, as I recall, has been to thoroughly examine that alternative course of action. And it has turned out that the logistics of that are more difficult than had been anticipated, and the costs are significantly greater. So we do find ourselves in a situation where we don't have the financial provisions having been set aside and collected over the last decade to readily pursue that preferred approach, which is land-based discharge. And so I think what we do need to do, in addition to committing to doing this differently next time, is we do need to make provision for it financially, which means in the upcoming long-term plan, we do now need to start collecting a significantly higher rate for this future option. And I think we need to be clear with the community that we haven't rated the community to date to raise the necessary funds to do this in this manner. We would be consulting them through the long-term plan process on doing so for next time. But it is a significant financial undertaking, and nobody doubts the importance of this from a recreational point of view for the community or from a cultural point of view from tangata whenua, and we would very much like to get this right. But we do need to budget for it, we do need to raise the funds for it, and we do need to ultimately consult the community on doing so. So I think we have some path dependency at the moment based on what has been in the existing long-term plan, as Councillor Foss indicated. There was a provision. There is a plan. We can achieve many of the outcomes here, just not all of the outcomes, by proceeding with the status quo option this time round. Is there anything that you wanted to add, Chris? relation to
We have two other
Councillor
questions here.
Foss's questions?
We have three, actually. We start with Will, Charlie, and then
Chair, can I just check whether there was anything in Councillor Foss's questions that...
Really to state that the recommendations do cover trying to improve the situation for next time. So our item number 4 is around changing the scope to specifically look at land-based for the next, for 10 years' time, to ensure that we have 2 or 2.5 million set aside for that campaign, and also so we can start work early looking for land, because that's a key part of that solution, and also to have a discussion around whether the scope should be increased to a larger extent of the river, and whether we should consult on that through the LTP as well, so that we make sure we get it right in 10 years' time and aren't having that same discussion. So there is some elements of the recommendations that basically will put us in a different position for the next campaign.
Will?
Thank you, Chair. If it's all right with you, I'll like to ask a question that may need to be answered by staff other than these three up here. But what the paper doesn't cover is going further upstream to the root cause of the problem. And so, with what the council is doing currently, via land management, or what is proposed with the tank plan change or right tree, right place, can we influence this problem to become less of a problem in the future?
So the short answer is certainly yes, and the council's significant focus on erosion control through the $30 million that council committed in the current long-term plan period to the erosion control scheme is the most significant effort this council's ever undertaken to deal with erosion in our hill country. We have known for nearly 80 years, in fact 79 years since the Soil Conservation Act was passed, and this council and its predecessor organisations had the statutory power to raise rates and undertake soil conservation activities. So we've been at this for a very long time. The truth is that we haven't made as much progress as a council, as a community, and as a country on erosion control as we should have, because we know that trees and ground, particularly widely spaced poplars and willow poles, is a very effective mitigation to sediment loss from our hills. So we do have more staff on the ground, probably 3 times more staff than we had 4 years ago out there working with landowners, and we've got significantly more resource. Over time, we would expect that to have a demonstrable impact on sediment loading into these water bodies. And I guess a key KPI for that work would be that at some point we're not having to do this certainly on a 10-year cycle, maybe on a 30-year cycle, and ultimately that we wouldn't have to do it at all. So that's very much the ambition, but that does require scaling up of afforestation across our erosion-prone country at an even greater scale than we're currently doing, and that's why in the long-term plan that we're currently developing, there will be proposals for the community to consider around an expanded tree planting program.
And just to follow on that, well, this is exacerbated by the fact we changed the river. So there's not the volume of water coming through. Sheriff, and then Charlie, then Sheriff. Charlie, you're just the one on the. I take the point about the cost to the ratepayer, but if we're talking about, we already know what the costs are going to be. Maybe we just need to cut our cloth somewhere else, because we realise that it is. It is part of it. When we were sorting out the priorities for the long-term plan, we noticed that our environmental management was highest on the list. And for us to now turn around and say there are mitigating circumstances in this particular case, I think would be wrong, especially if our mana whenua have already been talking about it for years. We don't want to have this discussion in 10 years' time. Well, we've already had it for the last couple of times, and we've done nothing about it. So we have an opportunity to maybe rethink some of the other priorities, like we did with the long-term plan. It's a lot of money, but it really is our bread and butter, the environment. Sheriff?
Okay, yeah, just point of clarification from you. I've got a couple of questions. So land discharge, did you say the consent may not be able to be achieved by 2021?
So, yeah, we can achieve it in 2021, but not by February 2021. So we won't be able to dredge next year because there is certain window we have, and especially for the land discharge, we want to do it in summer.
Okay.
And we want to avoid spawning season and avoid bedding. So we won't be able to do it, the dredging won't happen in 2021. The consent can happen if we have the land all signed off and agreed on to the condition what we have and the risk eliminated to it. Also, just to highlight it, there is still the risk. Even if we have a land, there is the risk coming with it. So we have to work through it.
Okay. So in future, if we would do plan for land discharge, would we be able to actually incorporate Kohopātiki Marae stretch of the Clive River as well? Is that a possibility?
Yes, there's definitely a possibility. There is, with that section of the river, the good thing is that we actually, the land is available there.
Okay. Okay.
So we could actually dredge and we already have the land available. The dredge cannot, so we will have to disestablish everything and move it over there, but it's possible. Everything is possible.
Okay. And my last question, Mr. Chair, in relation to what Councillor Foley mentioned, is there a possibility for us to actually focus on erosion in the Karamu catchment? Because this settlement is a real issue for us, it's a costly issue, also a public perception issue. So if we actually could put some additional focus on erosion control to see actually if we can mitigate at a faster rate than we are currently now.
So there's a couple of elements to that. One is that a high proportion of the sediment that comes into the Karamu system is from the disturbance of arable land. We have, as a long-standing practice as a council, supported Landwise to promote arable cropping systems that involve minimal disturbance of soils. Obviously, when soils are ploughed for cropping and there's rainfall, there will be runoff of sediment into adjacent waterways. So that's an issue where we've put effort in the past. The tank plan change will put further focus on that. And there's also an issue around the development of land for both residents and industry, where we have a compliance and enforcement role around ensuring that sediment doesn't enter those urban waterways that lead into the Karamu. But having said that, it's my understanding that the overwhelming majority of sediment that's sitting in this lower reach of the Clive River does not come via the Karamu. It comes via the Ngāraroto, and it comes round the corner and builds up back up the Clive length. And that's a consequence, obviously, of the much greater sediment loading coming from the hill country of the Ngāraroto catchment, and it comes down to the mouth. When the mouth is open and it's in full flood, most of that sediment will make its way to the sea. But a lot of the time where there's not a full flow and it's coming down at a slower rate, it is pushed around and back up the Clive. And again, I guess that's why the change of the Ngāraroto's course and the channeling that was conducted in the 1960s that brings it now down its current pathway parallel to the Clive has created this situation.
Charlie? I noticed on one of the during the workshop we talked about a worm that was present in the silt, is it?
Yeah, that's right.
And
At the
what effect
moment,
that might have?
yes, the Clive River got a tube worm, so it's around the bridge. And so what we propose is that during a dredging, we would actually remove the tube worm around it. So, because at the moment that's kind of spreading all around the bridge, and that would make the water even shallower. So we would remove the tube worm with the dredging.
I guess that's an added bonus of undertaking this work. We've certainly seen the whakapaumatis in the Ahuriri estuary build up to such a level that in places it's impeded the flow of water and effectively blocked up the waterway. And theoretically, at the Clive, that could over time fill in that space. So it's good to get it out, and the dredging gives us that opportunity to do that at the same time.
James, I have you got another question, Charlie? Yeah, just the last one on the silt build-up outside from maybe the last 20 years. I guess from there is the toka out at river, moko tuararo, and the Naururora and also the rangatira are important waterways. How does that silt, what happens to it? Where does it wash away? Does it wash south or north, or is it still there?
No, it's washed away to the sea.
And it would drift north from there? Yes.
Te Mohaka. I have a question here. Obviously, there's a lot of different passions around this issue. Is there an opportunity here for us to go out to the community, because we've got some of the community ringing us up saying, when are you dredging? We've got a Waitangi Day, we get hit every time. When are you doing it? They've got a rate impact here of 2.5%, and that's even if you borrow the money. If you said no, we're going to pay this with rates, which is probably what you should do, it's a substantial rate hike. Is there an opportunity for us to go out to the community and really thrash this out? And would it be worthwhile? Because you have a lot of different passions.
Yeah, so look, Rex, I think certainly that's very important. So if there is a decision today to proceed, I think it's very important that we are out in the community to explain why.
Okay.
I think also we've put in the recommendations to look at expanding the scope of dredging campaign, and that's a discussion we can have potentially through the LTP consultation process. So there's different aspects, I think, that all of which are very important to engage with the community on, because it is complex, and we need to make sure that everyone's informed as to the reason why certain things are being done. So it's a key aspect, and I think too where councillors can have some good engagement with the community as well as staff.
Any other questions?
I had a question, Mr Chairman, but I'm going to keep my powder dry for discussion of the substantive motion, and we've taken a lot of time with questions so far, so I'll defer to that.
It's very important if you have a question.
No, I think as with a number of the questions that we've heard, they can be best left for discussion of the motion.
Yeah. Craig, yours a question?
Yes, just picking up on that though, if you were to do that, is that in parallel with the current status quo of work beginning and explaining what you intend to do next, or is that one on hold until you do that? What's that time frame?
Look, so I think it's just probably working through the detail of the recommendation. I think if there was if the recommendation does get over the line to proceed with the status quo, I think it's very important as part of that we front the community to explain why the decision was made and the reasons behind it. So I think it would just be part of the package, I think, that's taken forward. And then on the subsequent issues around the scope, whether it's land-based and the extent of dredging, they can be discussed separately as part, potentially, if councillors agree, as part of the LTP ongoing discussion.
Thanks. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Chair. I just want to go to the recommendations as they're framed and the implication that there is a land-based solution there. There's the question, do we simply go to sea at the moment and work on the next 10 years to resolve and find a land-based solution? So I asked the question that hasn't been sought in the previous 10-year period. Well, I'm assuming a land-based solution wasn't being looked at. How long would it take, do you think, if the promise is to be in 10 years' time not to do this again, how long would it take to find a land-based solution if that's the promise?
So it is a little bit challenging to say because we can't guess what the various landowners may say. But I'd say it's a piece of work that we would commence now, so we have a high level of surety that we do have the land in 10 years. And there are options also to go through the Public Works Act, etc., if need be. But
Sure.
we would use that as a very last resort.
Do you think you could solve it in 1 year? Do you think you can get there in 1 year?
It's a very challenging question. Again, we are in negotiations with landowners, but as of today, we don't have access to the land. And our preferred position would be permanent ownership of that land, so we don't have the issue arise every decade, so
Sure.
to speak.
But given that's your goal and the aim is to get permanent ownership, that would resolve it for generations
we
to
would
come.
not want to wait 10 years to start that process, and I would be asking the team to continue the process we're currently in,
Sure.
so that we can hold that land at the earliest opportunity.
Sure.
And we can always lease it out in the interim.
Thank you.
Oh, Mike, sorry.
Just a point of clarification. So is, if the status quo is to remain, is there a consent required? Consenting process required?
Yes, so even if we go the status quo, we will need a resource consent for this activity, yes.
And this will be a notified?
No.
No.
It's got the consent.
No. It's a controlled activity, so yes, a consent needs to be issued, but has to be issued by the council as long as certain requirements are met.
And what would those requirements be?
If you know off the top of your head what they are in the rules.
Especially in regards to mana whenua.
So that's, so part of the resource consent, we do have to have active consultation with the EB group, and that's where we started pretty much at the beginning of the project, and that's still going to be ongoing until we resolve these issues. So yes, it is part of the resource consent, yeah.
Thank you.
Could take us a couple of years anyway. Anyway, and then you, Michelle.
Yes, so I'm tracking along the same lines as Michael. So point number 20, tangata whenua strongly support land-based disposal of dredging spoil. Is that because there is strong opposition to coastal disposal, or because actually we should be addressing upstream and have the opportunity to address dredging upstream as well as recreational type use? Could you clarify that?
Yeah. So tangata whenua support the land discharge for environmental. It's their feel is a, why would you take a problem from one location to other location? But they also don't support at the moment the land discharge we have until the solution is made to deal with upstream. So even if we have the land and even if we have everything in place, they're still not going to support to dredge only one section of the Clive, because they believe if there is a problem in one section, why are you not addressing the whole river and focusing only on the section where there is the recreational activities? So that's the feel we have from them when we were meeting them.
And can I just ask Mike if that's what the...
Yeah, so it's a case of which comes first, the horse or the cart. And in this case, yes, Martin quite right. There is a desire to have the upper Clive dredged as well. But then again, mana whenua do not want to be part of being seen to actually be having their awa dredge and then taking that sludge to the foreshore and just releasing it and releasing it back out to sea. It kind of goes against our values. I would hope it would go against Hawke's Bay Regional Council's values as well, but it certainly goes against ours. So hence the reason was that horse before the cart sort of thing.
No, but the question is, if they did have a land-based solution, they're still opposing it unless we do the whole stream.
The one in the whole stream has always been one of those conditions, one of those aspirational goals for mana whenua. But in realising that, so there has been dredging that has taken place outside of Kopariki Marae, and we had issues about disposing of it there. It was an issue there, and it was recognised by mana whenua. We were dredging it, then taking it out to the landfill and dropping it into the landfill. You know, it's those value things. Yeah. So hospital.
Hang on, I'm just okay. Just one last question. This paragraph 23.5. What's the purpose of that paragraph? Is it weighted on the significance to the bay, or is it weighted on the lack of opposition?
That's
Significant
more of a
activity.
governance.
It's a significant activity.
It's a significant activity. Isn't that it's because of the size of it? We've got a definition of what a significant activity is.
So just a question. So just to get it right in my mind. So if we voted for this today, you would still have to go through the consent process and talk to everybody, and we'd still talk to the community and say.
Wouldn't it have any sense?
So
It's in the long-term plan.
So what's
Sorry,
the
I'm
purpose of that paragraph again?
So it's saying that it doesn't kick off the our significance.
Significant in that sense.
So it's saying we're
That's
not
exactly
planning
right.
on selling a significant asset or anything like that. So it doesn't kick off
already in the long-term
a
plan.
process.
What was that say, Mark?
It's already in the long-term
It's in the
plan.
long-term
It is,
plan.
yeah.
And the consents will still be live from 1819 when you were proposing.
No, we have to go through a whole new consent, so we didn't go, so we start preparing the resource consent. And
There's no
then there
consent.
was a desire to look at the land discharge consent, and the resource consent is different for a discharge to coast than it's for a land discharge. Very different methodologies and processes. So we decided to go down the road resource consent for land discharge, but we were waiting for methodology and line and everything else. So now we drafted the resource consent for the discharge to coast, but then again, we have to go back to consultate with the EV group, recreational users, so we cover all the consultation for the resource consent.
So sorry, if just on those various options, let's say it was the status quo option, and you went through what you were required to do, when would you start dredging?
February 21 is
February
when
21.
when the dredge is scheduled to be here.
Right, okay, yep, that's
And
what I thought. Okay.
We are substantially through the consenting process, but we haven't submitted or finalised the consent. So depending on the signal we get today,
I see.
we would then proceed.
Okay, thank you.
We can forget Waitangi Day.
Yep.
That's right.
Stuck in the mud at Waitangi.
You got a question?
Although it'd
I had a
be
question.
fabulous if on Waitangi Day there was a dredge working.
It's just about public works taking, how long does that take? How long does that process take? It's just got a lot of similarities, except it's silt to the wastewater, you know, so it's like, you're gonna put it in the sea,
Yeah.
and not, not too, whānau, not too happy about that, and want to put it to land, and, there's all those issues around it, but I just want to know what, if there isn't the land available, you can use the public works option. How long does that take?
So I haven't personally done one in New Zealand. It's typically the last resort.
Wasn't back in the day though, eh? Told me, because Māori land was taken for public works.
Yeah, it wasn't back in the day.
As an estimate, it would probably take 6 to 12 months to go through that process. It's not a quick process that we can just
What was
get
it
the
again?
land next month. 6 to 12 months.
That's not
I
that
think.
long, really.
Well, that's
No,
That's good to know.
And part of that is I guess the consideration whether council wants to go down that track would be a key decision item as well.
And just another supplement. So would you be, because you're talking about discharge to the sea, the Tangaroa. So if you're going for land discharge, would that be a separate resource consent?
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's another thing. Learning that.
Any other questions? We do need to, there's obviously a lot of controversy, a lot of different points of view here. We're dealing with hardcore legacy issues that are really always hard to deal with. Probably need to test this, and if there's no more questions, I think that's what I'd like to do. Do we have a mover to
I
test?
suggest you move a motion, Chair. You've sat there and got the feel of this. Where do you think we should go? Lead?
No, I don't. Your second time you weren't trying to put me on front of the car. You'll move.
I'm happy to move recommendations 1, 2, 4, 5 and 6.
So not 3, which is the big one.
Do you have an alternative for 3?
Just saying. No,
1, 2, 4, 5 and 6. And so Neil wants to take out the controversial piece.
Well, if somebody seconds that, you can put it.
Is there a second to that?
Well, no one seconds it. It just lapsed. You'll have to call for another motion.
Oh, yeah, I'll second it. We have a seconder for that. Okay, Neil, you shall speak.
Well, I just, I've drawn a conclusion that it's not going to be acceptable to move to discharge at sea. I think there is scope to do a year's work, not to proceed in this coming season, delay a year, and there are, if the promise is to move to a land-based disposal, we've got to just get on with it. There's no mucking around, and I think that explanation to the recreational users, and just think about that for a moment, we've got a relatively small group of stakeholders that will be inconvenienced if we delay a year. And I'm suggesting that we can have that discussion with them, ask them for their patience, and proceed at speed to a land-based solution. I know there's one there that'll satisfy the council, either that or using the Local Government Act to proceed in any event. And that's my advice, is that it's just totally inconsistent with where we want to land with our the sedimentation that's going on at sea, and I just suggest, for the sake of that year, and come up with the right formula in terms of finding the right bit of land, then let's do that. It's worth that 1 year wait. We can always, worst case scenario, go back to the dreaded discharge if we ultimately had to, but I'm suggesting there is a solution there. We can find it. We need to resolve the issues on the upward reaches of the river as well, and come up with a comprehensive plan. And if we're quick smart out of this, we can put it into the next LTP as well.
Chair, just for clarity for councillors before there's further debate, the consequence of going down that path, I think, would be that we would revise our numbers for the long-term plan consultation to raise $500,000, probably via debt, for doing this in 1 year's time, and that would be on top of raising, therefore, another $1 million for 10 years' time, when we would come back to it by way of an increase in the targeted rate. So just to be clear, that's the approach that we would take, and as part of the long-term plan, I guess you would consult on doing this both in year 1 of the LTP and also out at the 10-year point as well on this new land discharge basis.
Charlie?
Yeah, I see it as exactly what Michelle was discussing. There are similarities between what we propose to do and some of the wastewater discharges that are going on within the bay already, that we're definitely frowning on. And I can see the reason why we have such a very good project about planting trees to stop land erosion, and we want to turn around and do exactly the opposite by putting more silt out there without considering the implications of our 30-year, 40-year proposal about the trees. We just we're really too conflicted to be with our intent of whether we're supporting the environment or supporting other activities, and supporting tangata whenua, I might add, who have been voicing concerns about this for quite a long time. So I think we need to stop playing around, make our decision that we're either for the environment or we're not.
Charlie, Martin?
Yeah, I've got considerable sympathy with the motion. I find it very difficult in principle and in good conscience to vote in favour of putting 60,000 cubic metres of what all of the science tells us is the single biggest water quality stressor in the region into the sea on what is essentially a recreation and amenity pretext. So I was a wafer away from seconding that motion. But despite all of that, we do have to make a decision. This isn't quite as bad as Churchill deciding not to notify Coventry that it was about to be bombed, but it is one of those decisions where there's only different versions of bad. And so ultimately, because I think we need to make a decision now, I wouldn't support this motion. In the following context. The first is that, to reflect on the paper, there is no do-nothing option here. The option that is here is an absolute commitment that this is the very last time. And to load into the long-term plan so that we don't get to Mike's point of waiting 30 years, sufficient capital so that we can buy some land and we can do this properly next time. Not wait until 30 years and go, oh, we've got a problem again, but now. I just hesitate with a degree of realism on the expectation that having negotiated to lease some land for 2 years, we can buy it within a year, even if we had the resources available, which we don't. At the moment, a Public Works Act, if it came to it, could take 18 months, it could take 2 years. They're notoriously fickle and can be challenged all the way. So there's that factor. There is the factor that the ratepayers already paid for this, and there is at least part of our communities that we represent saying, well, get on with it. And the third factor is that in addition to this never being done again, which is what 4, 5 and 6 are about, if I look at Tank, it says not only that Karamu and Clive are priorities, to answer Councillor Foley's point, absolute priorities for sediment control, that we will, as a council, prioritise the following mitigation measures: regulating cultivation, stock access and vegetation clearance activities, targeting priority areas and activities for sediment loss management where there is high sediment loss, and informing land managers where land is vulnerable to erosion. So this will take time. This is another waka we're trying to launch here, and it will take time to dig in. And ultimately, as you said, James, in 30 years' time, this shouldn't be necessary. So when I balance all of that, I am, by the narrowest and slimmest of margins and against basically my conscience on this, against the motion that's just been put, and ever so slightly marginally in favour of recommendation 3.
Is that a move to amendment?
I don't know what.
No,
what
it's
the
just going to
procedure is.
oppose
I
this
think
one.
we'd have to put this one to the vote.
Yeah, we'd need to.
Poll, and you know where I
Rick?
stand on it. I won't need to speak to
Craig?
it again.
Well, I was actually, no, I wanted to move an amendment to Councillor Curtin's motion. Is that the appropriate time?
Yes, I would say yes.
Okay, well that
I was quite keen to test.
Well, this will test it.
Yeah.
It will do.
He's entitled to move.
So the amendment I move to Councillor Curtin's motion is to include recommendation 3. So in fact, all recommendations are picked up.
You can do.
Yep,
Of course you can.
yep, absolutely.
And, yeah.
Contrary to the
Not contrary to the
contrary
motion.
No, it doesn't.
Oh.
Complements it.
The way it's drafted, it's not mutually exclusive.
I'll second that. But can I just ask the move of the amendment to consider amending 4, instead of agrees to consider, take out consider, agrees to changing.
It would be a
There was a
very,
weakness in
very
the...
welcome,
Sorry?
very welcome change of wording.
Yeah.
I just thought it was a
You agree
weakness
to
in the
that?
original.
Yeah, I know. Yes, I do, Chair, and that I think reflects the general consensus of commitment rather than think about things. So the correct wording for there, thanks Councillor Barker, so what I just said, as well as amending 4 to read Rick?
Agrees to changing.
I say yes, agrees to changing the scope. Okay, so we just dropped a word.
It's an emphatic statement there.
So that's my amendment to Councillor Curtin's.
And if you wish to speak further to the amendment, or you?
No, I'll just,
He has got a
it's
seconder,
been
Rick's a
seconded.
seconder.
No, I'll just leave that on the table. I think some very wise words have been spoken, Mr Chair.
Rick, do you wish to speak as a seconder to the amendment? And then I'll come to you in a while.
I have to say that Martin has, Councillor Williams has put it quite succinctly. We're hanging on the edge here. We're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't. I do accept the point that Mike Paku has made, that we've mucked around with for ages, and that's why I suggested we take out the consider. We've got no more thinking about this. We have to make a definitive decision. We're going to stop. But on the other side of it, I have been contacted by a number of people who have interest in the water sports at Clive. My own kids have been there and participated in these water sports. It's an important activity. I wouldn't diminish it at all. It's not just about being at high tide. As the sediment goes up, the amount of area that you can use is shortening the race course. Every year they have a regatta there, and there are hundreds and hundreds of young people come along for a sporting event. I just want to see kids in sports, enjoying themselves and developing themselves, learning things. And if we don't do something here, this asset is gone. But not only that, there's other things about it. We've taken money from people for dredging. We've put in the plan and said we're going to dredge. If we don't do it, we're telling them we've fibbed to them. I don't like that. And the one point I had with the original motion was that it seemed that we're going to do this, to defer it for a year, and then we're going to have, consider changing. Well, this is hope. I'm not going to vote in favour of hope. I'm going to vote in favour of when we've got something that's definitive. And we have to put a stake in the ground and say, well, we're not doing it anymore. So that's why I'm supporting it reluctantly. I accept the issues that Mike makes about putting the sediment in the river, but it's heading that way anyway, in my view, with the flooding and so on. It's heading out to sea. We're not going to stop that. What we are going to, in any short time soon, but we are saying that the next time the river fills up, as it will do, and we'll have to dredge it, it ain't going on the sea. It's going to go onto land, and we've given ourselves time and capacity to find the answer. And we've said it is an absolute commitment. There is no alternative to that. Done.
Api, I missed you out. I know Henry had her hand up. Did you have your hand up previously, Dave? You did? Okay. Well, you're on. Then I'll come to you anyway. Sorry.
Just a minute, can't vote.
He can't vote, but he can speak.
He can speak.
Understood. Thank you. So just to express thank you for the implications that have been put forward around changing the motion and suggesting that after 30 years of conversations with local iwi, that it's perhaps about time we did something concrete rather than consider doing something concrete. So from an iwi perspective, that's an encouraging sign. What I would express from an iwi perspective is that what money and efforts have been spent on this area have been around recreational values, and while those are important, and I do also concur with Councillor Barker's comments that a kid in sport is a kid out of court, so there are a whole lot of wellbeing reasons as to why we need to provide for recreation, but I am continually concerned that after 30 years of conversation with mana whenua, we're still not taking a holistic approach around this waterway. I'm wondering whether or not all the sediment coming from the, was it the Ngaruroro, and coming around the bend and coming back up, are they a part of the catchment that are paying the targeted rate? If not, then why is that catchment paying for Ngaruroro sediment, and how are they participating in the solution? I'm also concerned around the implications that the decision today implies that once we pass this decision, we won't be revisiting this for another 10 years. And so far, the paper is only about recreational use from the bridge to the river mouth. So when and how will we have an opportunity to look at the broader issues?
Tank plan change.
Thank you, Api. Anyway.
Yeah, I'd like to make additional amendments. So with point 5, just to be consistent, agrees to increasing the scope, so deleting consider.
Agree with that.
And then further on, instead of potentially up to Kohupātaki marae, including up to Kohupātaki marae. So replacing the word potentially with including.
Agree with that too.
If we're looking to start to acknowledge and strengthening the cultural values, not just the recreational values, we have to prioritise in a way those cultural values. And that's what I'd like to see reflected in point 5, which is why those amendments I think are stronger in that way. But other than that, I support what's been said so far.
Sorry,
Chair, can we clarify, is Councillor Ormsby moving an amendment to the amendment, or is she asking?
I am.
She's moving amendment and
She is suggesting that, but I'm just saying, as a seconder of the amendment, I'm happy to accept that. And if the mover of the amendment says he is happy to accept it, they can then form the substantive amendment.
I'm comfortable with that.
You're happy with that?
Yes, I am.
Chair, just to clarify, the reason that we put the wording to consider in there originally was just not to be preemptive of the consultative process under the long-term plan. But look, I'm comfortable with the fact that the wording does reference the development process for the long-term plan. So implied in that is that there will be further engagement with the community before there is a final commitment, which is a statutory step that council does indeed need to go through. So we'll include it in the process, but obviously that will all be subject to public consultation.
We don't need a sector if the mover and seconder of the previous one accept it.
Yep.
Okay. So,
You're taking speakers.
yeah, I certainly am, yeah.
Move on then, Mr. Chair.
You're having a shocker.
Mike.
I just wanted to add it. So mana whenua have always recognised the recreational values of the lower Clive, and have always supported that. They've always recognised the number of gold medals that have been won at the Olympics by those who actually learnt their trade on the Clive River. They've also recognised the amount of world records that have been set by those participants. We've seen in recent years the addition of waka armour, and of course the waka taua, and those recreational uses that have taken place. So mana whenua have never ever been against the recreational use of that waterway. We always have supported it. Our concern has and always will be the settlement, the continued issues around settlement. So you have to go back and dredge it every 10 years. It's a bit of an indictment on us all in regards to how we approach settlement and how we move to mitigate settlement impacts on our waterways, not just the Clive. That is actually across our region. We also need to remember that settlement has been an issue prior to the coming of the Europeans. The Heretaunga alluvial plains didn't happen after the arrival of our European brotherhood. It was always there. So settlement has always been an issue. So just by planting trees, we don't resolve the issue. We don't just resolve the issue. We may mitigate the worst aspects of it, but we don't mitigate it. So I would hope going forward that our thinking goes much deeper than what we're currently doing. Now, I've always been in favour of learning how to live with settlement, with settlement.
It's literally folk art.
With the settlement itself. So sediment trapping. We know that under certain conditions we can get sediment to drop into a certain area. So why are we doing that? Rather than just opening up our waterways to be exposed to sediment drop right throughout the length of that waterway. Why are we not trying to contain it? But part of our thinking around land treatment was, it's one thing to trap it, but then you've got to deal with it. Can't just keep picking it up and taking it to the foreshore and leaving it there. It has to go to land treatment, and we need to be able to treat it. We need to be able to remove the heavy metals and all the other contaminants that sit within. So that was Mana Whenua was thinking. Some actually long-term thinking, because it wasn't happening here. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Mike. Thanks for that. So I think those changes do actually push to that. I'd just like to make a comment that it took 150 years for us to cause these problems, and we're not going to fix it in 10. You know, it's going to take us a while, but I just want to pick up another point you made, sediment trapping, because I know they do that in Europe, and every day a truck comes along and picks it up. So, you know, there are other innovative ways which we should and could look at this situation. I'm sure we could do a lot better than we're doing. Neil?
Well, I want to speak against the amendment, Mr. Chair, because we need to be clear on what we're doing here. Yep. The amendment is now asking us to go to an ocean-based disposal approach. That's what that amendment does. And my concern about it is that, and I'm asking my colleagues to reflect on that, because there is this alternate ground. It's a delay of 1 year to potentially arrive at a land-based disposal. That's what that does. But it does a number of other things, and it's been touched on here. We've got Councillor Foley saying, where is the longer, bigger picture being considered here? Why aren't we considering that? It gives us an opportunity to introduce those elements of mitigation upstream, etc. The other element which Mana Whenua was particularly concerned about and won't support this in any event, even if we do decide to proceed, is that what is the upper reaches looking like in terms of that location around Kolpatiki. So I'm really putting it to you and saying, for the sake of 1 year, I'm adamant that a land-based solution can be achieved. Negotiation or otherwise with landowners can get the result we're wanting to, for the sake of one year's delay on an ocean-based discharge. To me, that sends all of those reputational issues out the window, just for the sake of 1 year's recreational inconvenience. That's what this amendment does, is simply delay. It proceeds with a rush of blood to the head for discharge to see when we can avoid that, put it into the long-term plan, get a proper financial basis underway, and I'm suggesting that we simply tie-ho on this and go with the alternate, which is to reject the ocean-based discharge.
Can I just ask staff, is Neil right? We could achieve this in 1 year?
There is always the risk. That's what we have to mitigate. We have to find a mitigation for the risk. And we, at the moment, don't have the mitigation for the risk.
So, I guess some of the uncertainties are we've got the rig scheduled for February 2021, but we don't know its availability for February 2022. So that's a question mark that we can't provide the answer today, I don't believe. We've also got to go through a consenting process for land-based disposal, which we will need to consult with the neighbours, we understand. So again, there's potential for neighbours to object, etc. And so again, there's some uncertainty with that. So I think there's no guarantees, but it certainly, it's a good long-term solution, and a year is a good amount of time to work on all of those aspects, but we can't stand here with a guarantee that everything will work out. But in all probability, it probably will.
But if you go to a consenting process and it comes over you get the consent, it could be appealed to the Environment Court.
That's right.
It could be appealed all over the place. I could clever strategy, forestall you for 10 years if I had the money. No problem. There's no guarantees
The worst case scenario is that we're in the same position at the end of 21, making this call, when we've given it that opportunity. That's my point, is that let's give it the opportunity.
Yeah, but it's
and
actually
space to-
2 years, Neil. It's actually 2
Well,
years.
Then we might not have the dredge,
Well,
because the dredge has gone somewhere else.
Well, worst case scenario, if that did transpire, we'd end up with 2 years. Well, I'm sorry, recreational users, that you've had to be inconvenienced like that, when the alternative is to put this stuff out to sea, with the consequences of that.
Okay, we've thrashed this out, so,
The amendment first.
actually, the amendment means everything really, doesn't it? So we can,
Yeah, with those
With the
changes.
changes.
with those changes back.
So if we can,
Well, theoretically, you put the amendment, and if the
And you
amendment's
put it again.
carried, then you put the motion as a
Okay.
total.
So the amendment is to add that, leave it in.
Yep. And the changes taking out the
Yeah,
maybes.
4 and 5, changing the
4 and
wording.
5.
Yeah, yes, and the word changes, taking out consider.
You've got those, Leanne, haven't you?
Yes.
Yes.
So what I would actually suggest is that we take number 3 separately and then take 4 and 5 together.
Not what I suggested.
No, it's not how you do it.
Take
take
the
them as-
amendment
You
as.
take the
That's one.
amendment first, and if the amendment is carried, it then forms part of the substantive motion. If the amendment is lost, then it goes back to Neil's motion unamended.
That's right.
That's how we do it.
Okay, we'll do it like that. We take the amendment first.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, who moved, you moved it? No,
I moved it.
Craig moved
Craig
it,
moved
you
it.
seconded
Yep.
it.
Consider out.
Rightio.
It's 4 and 5 are.
We'll take the
Consider's
amendment.
gone.
Does that include taking the consider out, the amendment?
Yes, it does.
It does?
Yep.
Okay.
Can I just have clarification that as Takanga Whenua and Mana Whenua representatives, do we actually get a vote?
No.
No, thank you.
No, because it's,
Yeah, well, here it was, no point, and stop.
okay, so to be very clear, we're taking the amendment, which really essentially leaves 3 in, and it also taking the changes which Haniwai put up, which is essentially around consider, means that we will do. Okay, all those in favour?
Aye.
Against? 3. Now, do you wish to have your vote notified? That is carried. So then we go back to the substantive, which is all recommendations, all 6 recommendations. Do we have a mover?
With,
Oh, it's already.
with-
that's
Well,
the
moved and
motion.
seconded.
So,
No,
It now becomes the motion.
that's right.
now becomes
Been moved,
a
Neil,
substantive
seconded.
motion.
So it just needs to be
well,
voted on.
Neil's amended a motion is about to be put.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
So you absorb
Yep.
what we just voted on, and now that's been
Become the
put.
motion.
Yeah.
That's right. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against?
No.
3. It's carried. Oh,
Should we break for lunch?
may we be protected as we go forward. I think we will stop for lunch. It's 5 minutes early.
I think we're exhausted now.
Still waiting for the chairman's coffee.
We've run our course.
We're well behind on time, but I think justifiably so.
I don't know about that. Neil said you're having a shock.